The sun beat down on the roof of our dusty SUV, its heat a physical presence inside the car despite the air conditioning working at full blast. Outside, the arid landscape stretched out in a palette of bleached browns and dusty greens, a seemingly endless expanse broken only by the shimmering ribbon of asphalt that cut through it. We were on the final leg of our great American Southwest adventure, a 2-week road trip that had taken us through breathtaking canyons, across vast deserts, and through sleepy frontier towns. The back of the car was a chaotic museum of our journey, a collection of polished rocks, a slightly deflated souvenir cactus, maps covered in highlighter lines, and the sweet, persistent smell of sunscreen and trail mix. In the back seat, our 7-year-old daughter, Luna, was finally, blessedly asleep. Her head was tilted at an awkward angle against the window, her favorite stuffed armadillo tucked under her chin. For the past hour, she'd been a fountain of the relentless, circular questions only a child can muster. Are we there yet? How much longer? Why is it so hot? Her exhaustion, and now silence, was a welcome relief. My husband, Carlos, was behind the wheel, his sunglasses hiding eyes I knew were tired but content. He loved these trips, the sense of freedom, the planning of the route, the role of navigator and protector. He'd mapped this entire journey with the precision of a military campaign, and it had been flawless. Every hotel was booked, every national park entry reserved, every potential pitfall anticipated and avoided. Or so we thought. I glanced into the rearview mirror, not at the road behind us, but at the peaceful face of our sleeping child. A wave of pure, uncomplicated love washed over me. This was what it was all about. These moments of quiet contentment after days of excited exploration. We were a unit, a self-contained capsule of happiness rolling through the magnificent emptiness. Up ahead, a cluster of low, official-looking buildings materialized from the heat haze. A series of signs, first in English, then in Spanish, began to appear. Last exit for gas before border. All vehicles must stop. Have documents ready. The border checkpoint. It was a routine part of the journey home, a mere formality we'd been through half a dozen times before. It held no more significance to me than a toll booth. I remember feeling a slight annoyance at the prospect of the delay, a desire to just be home, to sleep in my own bed, to unpack the memories along with the dusty luggage. Okay, team, documents time, Carlos said, his voice relaxed. He reached into the center console and pulled out our worn leather passport holder. He handed it to me without taking his eyes off the road. Everything's in there. Mine, yours, Luna's. Just like always. I took it, the leather warm from the sun. I unzipped it out of habit, my fingers doing a quick, perfunctory inventory. I saw the deep blue of my Canadian passport. I saw the dark green of Carlos's. I saw the corner of a pink receipt from a Santa Fe taco shop he'd used as a bookmark. I saw the edge of Luna's bright purple health card. Satisfied, I zipped it back up. I didn't flip through the pages. I didn't double-check. Why would I? Carlos was the organized one, the planner. He had a system. He always had a system. My job was to hand the neatly compiled package over when asked. It was our well-practiced dance, a small marital ritual of shared responsibility that had always worked perfectly. The checkpoint grew larger, a stark outpost of authority in the wild landscape. The flow of traffic began to slow, funneling into a series of lanes marked by orange cones. The illusion of endless, free movement was gently but firmly corralled into order. I rolled down my window, a blast of superheated air rushing into the cool cabin. The line of cars crept forward. I felt utterly, completely safe. Annoyed by the stop, yes. Eager to be home, absolutely. But safe. We were a normal family on a normal trip. We had nothing to hide. We had our documents in order. We had our sleeping child in the back. We were the very picture of harmless tourist innocence. The car in front of us was waved through. Carlos eased our SUV forward until we were next. The uniformed officer stepped out of his shaded booth and approached my open window. He had a neutral, professional expression. This was it. The final, simple formality between us and our own front door. I held the passport holder in my hand, ready to pass it over with a polite smile. The entire journey, every mile, every memory, had led to this utterly mundane, 30-second interaction. I had no idea that the carefully constructed illusion of our routine journey was about to shatter into a million pieces. The safety I felt was a paper screen, and the man walking toward us was about to set a match to it. The border officer's approach was unhurried, almost languid in the oppressive heat. He was a large man, his uniform crisp despite the temperature, his face shaded by the brim of his hat. His expression wasn't unfriendly, but it was utterly neutral, a professional mask that gave nothing away. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a flat, bored monotone. "Citizenship." "Canadian," I replied, my voice bright and practiced. I offered him a polite, effortless smile, the kind you reserve for service interactions. I held up the leather passport holder. "All three of us." He gave a slight nod, his eyes already moving past me, doing a quick, sweeping scan of the car's interior. This was normal. We'd done this before. His gaze flicked over Carlos, who nodded respectfully, then drifted into the back seat. It lingered for a half-second on Luna, still deep in her exhausted sleep, her mouth slightly open, her armadillo clutched tightly. A flicker of something, maybe the faintest softening at the edges of his eyes, passed over his face before the neutral mask settled back into place. But then his eyes continued their scan. They moved over the mess in the footwell. Luna's discarded coloring book, an empty water bottle. They tracked over the piles of souvenirs and snacks. It was a casual glance, but it felt different from before. Felt assessing, slower, more deliberate. The easy rhythm of the interaction hit a subtle, almost imperceptible snag. The air, thick with heat, seemed to grow heavier. Carlos, sensing the shift a fraction of a second before I did, shifted slightly in his driver's seat. It was the tiniest movement, a barely noticeable straightening of his posture. I felt it more than saw it. The officer's attention returned to me. "Purpose of your trip?" "Vacation," I said, the word coming out a little too quickly. 2 weeks. Seeing the parks. I kept the smile on my face, but it was starting to feel stiff, like plaster. He nodded again, slow this time. His eyes held mine for a beat too long. It wasn't a stare. It was a calibration. He was no longer just processing a vehicle. He was reading us. "Any fruits, vegetables, plants, or firearms to declare?" The question was routine, but the delivery felt different. The cadence was slower, each word given its own weight, as if he were listening not just for the answer, but for the tone in which it was delivered. "No, sir," Carlos answered, his voice calm and even, a stark contrast to the sudden, frantic beating of my heart. I realized I was clutching the passport holder too tightly, my knuckles white. The officer's gaze drifted back to the back seat again. This time it wasn't a glance. It was a study. He was looking at Luna's sleeping form, but his eyes were narrowed slightly, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. A trickle of cold sweat traced a path down my spine beneath my shirt. Nothing had happened. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't accused us of anything. But the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The checkpoint was no longer a mundane formality. It had transformed into a place of scrutiny and potential danger. The illusion of being just another harmless tourist family was evaporating under the silent, watchful pressure of his gaze. He leaned in slightly, his hands resting on the doorframe of my open window. The movement was casual, but it felt like an invasion of our space, a subtle assertion of control. That's when Carlos did it. He didn't turn his head. He didn't move a muscle. But his voice, so low it was almost inaudible, a breath meant only for me, slithered through the tense air between our seats. Act normal. The two words were like a splash of ice water. They were not a reassurance. They were a warning, a confirmation that the danger I felt was real, that he felt it too, that the professional, neutral officer at our window was a threat. My blood ran cold. The passport holder in my hand suddenly felt like a live grenade. The routine journey was over. We were now in uncharted territory, and the only map we had was a husband's terrified whisper and a command that was becoming increasingly impossible to obey. The two words hung in the air between Carlos and me, a toxic little cloud that poisoned the already stifling atmosphere inside the car. Act normal. The command was so simple, so utterly impossible. It was like being told to stop your heart from beating or to forget your own name. The officer was still leaning on the doorframe, his eyes doing another slow, deliberate sweep of the car's interior. He hadn't heard the whisper. His focus was on the contents of our vehicle, on the sleeping child, on us as subjects of his quiet, intense scrutiny. My mind went into a frantic, silent overdrive. Asterisk, what does he see? What does he know? Asterisk, the question screamed inside my head with no answers. My heart was no longer just beating fast. It was a frantic, caged animal throwing itself against my ribs. I could feel the pulse thrumming in my neck, a betraying rhythm I was sure was visible to the officer's trained eye. I became hyper-aware of every micro-expression on my face. Was my smile too wide? Too tight? Did it look like a grimace? I forced my jaw to relax, my lips to settle into what I hoped was a neutral, pleasant line. The muscles in my cheeks ached with the effort. My hands were the biggest traitors. They were gripping the passport holder like it was the only thing keeping me from flying apart. I could feel a fine tremor in my fingers. Slowly, carefully, as if moving through a field of landmines, I relaxed my grip. I placed the holder on my lap and casually folded my hands over it, hoping the gesture looked relaxed and not like I was guarding state secrets. I dared a glance at Carlos. His profile was a masterpiece of forced calm. His hands were at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, loose and easy. He was looking straight ahead, his posture relaxed, but I could see the tightness in his jaw, the almost imperceptible clench of a muscle there. He was performing, and he was performing flawlessly. His act normal wasn't just a suggestion. It was a demonstration. The silence stretched. It was only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity in a vacuum. The officer finally finished his visual inventory and returned his attention to me. His eyes, cold and appraising, locked onto mine. The urge to speak, to fill the terrible silence with babbling, inane chatter was overwhelming. Asterisk, we had a great time. The Grand Canyon was amazing. The weather was so hot, wasn't it? Asterisk, I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, using the sharp pain to anchor myself to silence. Speaking would be a mistake. It would sound nervous, guilty. Act normal. The command echoed, a mantra of survival. Asterisk, breathe. Smile. Don't fidget. Don't look him in the eye for too long. Don't look away too quickly. Asterisk. I felt like a puppet whose strings were being pulled by my own sheer terror. Every breath was a calculated performance. Every blink was rehearsed. The normal I was acting out was a grotesque caricature of myself. I was a smiling, serene mask plastered over a core of pure, liquefied fear. The officer's neutral expression didn't change. He gave no indication that he saw through our performance. But he didn't end the inspection either. He was drawing it out, letting the pressure build, watching for a crack in the facade. He was a predator, and we were prey, doing a desperate, clumsy dance to convince him we were predators too. The weight of the passport holder on my lap felt like a ton of bricks. Contained the answer to all of this, whatever this was. And in that moment of heightened, paralyzing awareness, a new, more specific terror began to bloom in the pit of my stomach. The passports. Carlos had handed them to me. I had done my perfunctory check. I'd seen the colors. I felt the edges. But I hadn't really looked. Not really. The officer opened his mouth to speak, and the world narrowed to the space between us. The performance was over. The interrogation was about to begin. And the only thing standing between our family and an unimaginable catastrophe was a command to be something I could no longer remember how to be. The officer's lips parted, and for a heart-stopping second, I braced for an accusation, a barked order, the end of our world. But what came out was a voice so calm, so deliberately measured. It was more terrifying than any shout could have been. "Quite a trip you folks had," he said, his tone almost conversational. He gestured loosely toward the back seat with his chin. Looks like someone enjoyed herself. His eyes crinkled at the corners. It wasn't quite a smile, but a facsimile of one. A professional tool designed to put people at ease. On anyone else, it might have worked. On me, in that state of hyper-alert panic, it was a predator's grin. The calm was a tactic. I knew it in my bones. He was lulling us, trying to get us to drop our guard. "Oh, yes," I heard myself say. My voice sounded thin and reedy, alien to my own ears. I fought to inject some warmth into it, some of the effortless charm I'd possessed minutes before. She's all tuckered out. It was a lot of driving. Asterisk too much. I'm saying too much. Stop talking. Asterisk I clamped my mouth shut, my smile feeling like a rictus grin. The officer's eyes held mine, and I saw it then. A flicker of sharp intelligence behind the neutral facade. He was noting my hesitation, the slight tremor in my voice I couldn't quite suppress. He was a fisherman, and he'd just felt a nibble on the line. "I bet," he said, his voice still soft, almost friendly. "It's a big country to see." His gaze drifted down to my lap, to my hands folded over the leather passport holder. "Well, let's make this quick, so you can get your little one home to her own bed." He extended his hand, not with a demand, but with a relaxed, open-palmed expectation. It was a simple, routine gesture, but in the charged silence, it felt like the reaching hand of fate. This was it, the moment of truth. All I had to do was hand him the neatly compiled package of our identities. The thing Carlos had prepared, the thing I had checked. My body refused to move. It was as if my muscles had frozen solid. A primal part of me screamed not to hand it over, that once I did, there was no going back. The passport holder was no longer just a document case. It was Pandora's box, and I was about to lift the lid. Carlos, sensing my paralysis, gave a barely perceptible nod, his eyes fixed straight ahead. "Do it." With a slowness that felt incriminating in itself, I unstuck my hands from my lap. The tremor was back. I couldn't control it. I picked up the holder and placed it in the officer's waiting hand. His fingers closed around it, and I felt a jolt of pure, undiluted fear. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, his tone still infuriatingly pleasant. He unzipped the holder with a slow, deliberate pull. The sound of the zipper was obscenely loud in the tense quiet of the car. He opened the flap, his eyes scanning the contents. He pulled out the 2 adult passports first, my deep blue one, his dark green one. He glanced at the photos, then at us, the standard verification. He held them in his left hand. Then his right hand went back into the holder. I watched his fingers, my breath caught in my throat. He moved aside the pink receipt from the taco shop. He nudged past Luna's purple health card. His fingers paused. He frowned, a small, almost thoughtful crease appearing between his eyebrows. He looked back into the holder, his fingers probing more deliberately now, moving the contents around. The friendly, conversational pretense evaporated. The air around us went cold. His eyes lifted from the passport holder and met mine. The neutral mask was gone. In its place was a look of focused, serious inquiry. The fisherman had set the hook. "Ma'am," he said, his voice losing its practiced warmth, becoming flat and official. "I see yours and your husband's documents here." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the implication hang, heavy and terrifying, in the air between us. "And the child's passport?" The question landed not like a question, but like a physical blow. It was delivered with a flat, neutral tone, devoid of accusation, yet it carried the weight of an entire world collapsing. Asterisk, "And the child's passport?" Asterisk. The words echoed in the silent, air-conditioned cabin, each one a shard of ice piercing the fragile bubble of our performed normalcy. Time didn't just slow, it shattered. The world outside the car, the heat haze, the other vehicles, the distant hum of the checkpoint, blurred into an indistinct nightmare. My brain short-circuited. It was a simple question. It demanded a simple answer. But my mind, scrambling through a fog of sheer, unadulterated terror, could find no purchase. The child's passport, Luna's passport, the small, dark blue booklet identical to mine. I saw Carlos's hands tighten on the steering wheel, his knuckles bleaching white. I felt, rather than saw, the minute stiffening of his entire body. The performance was over. The command to act normal had been rendered obsolete by 5 simple words. The officer's eyes were locked on me. The friendly pretense was completely gone. His gaze was now sharp, analytical, and utterly relentless. He was no longer making conversation. He was conducting an investigation, and I was the sole subject. The words stuck in my throat, a dry, pathetic croak. My mouth moved, but no sound came out. I could feel the blood draining from my face, a cold, prickling sensation spreading across my scalp. I was certain I was about to be sick. My eyes flicked involuntarily to the passport holder in his hand. It was still open. I could see the contents. My passport, Carlos's passport, the stupid pink receipt, the corner of Luna's purple health card, but no small, dark blue booklet. The reality of the oversight, catastrophic in its simplicity, crashed down on me with the force of a tidal wave. We had forgotten our daughter's passport. In the chaos of packing, in the exhaustion of the long drive, in the blind trust of Carlos's system and my own perfunctory check, we had left it behind. It was probably sitting on the dresser in her room, or buried under a pile of laundry, a tiny, innocuous thing that had just become the most important object in our universe. The officer saw the dawning horror on my face. He saw the silent, frantic communication between Carlos and me. He saw the complete and total disintegration of our composure. He didn't repeat the question. He didn't need to. His silence was more powerful than any demand. He simply waited, his expression impassive, letting us drown in the terrifying implications of our own mistake. In the back seat, Luna stirred in her sleep, letting out a soft sigh. The sound, so normal and innocent, was a knife to my heart. We were at an international border. We had no proof of who she was, no proof she was our child. The scenarios that flashed through my mind were ripped from a parent's worst nightmare. Detention, questioning, social services, being separated from her. The innocent question had revealed our truth. We were no longer a harmless tourist family. We were a potential problem. A case. A couple attempting to cross an international border with a child and no documentation. The trust we had taken for granted had vanished, replaced by a wall of cold, hard suspicion. The friendly facade was gone, and we were now staring into the abyss of protocol, law, and a mistake that could unravel our lives. The officer's patient, silent stare was a verdict. The question hung in the air, its echo replaced by a roaring silence in my ears. My blood didn't just run cold. It seemed to crystallize, a sharp, frozen sludge moving through veins that felt like they were cracking. The heat pouring through the open window was a lie. A deep, permafrost cold was locking me from the inside out. My eyes, wide with a horror I could no longer hide, met Carlos's in the rearview mirror. In that reflected sliver of his face, I saw my own terror mirrored, then magnified. The color had drained from his complexion, leaving a sickly, grayish pallor. The confident planner, the unflappable navigator, was gone. In his place was a man staring into an abyss he had not charted. The realization was a physical blow, a sucker punch to the soul. It wasn't just a forgotten document. It was a catastrophic, monumental, life-altering oversight. We had crossed an international border with our child and no proof of who she was. No proof she was ours. The mundane reality of the object, a small blue booklet, collided with the immense, terrifying weight of its absence. My mind, scrambling for a lifeline, began to race through a frantic, internal checklist, a desperate attempt to undo the impossible. The hotel safe? No, we'd never used it. The glove box? Carlos had a system. The system was the leather holder. Her backpack? Filled with crayons and snacks, not government documents. Did we ever even take it out? The memory was a blur of early morning packing, of shoving last-minute things into bags, of assuring each other we had everything. We didn't have everything. We had nothing. The officer's neutral expression was now the most frightening thing I had ever seen. It gave nothing away. It was a blank slate upon which our worst fears could be written. He wasn't angry. He wasn't suspicious. He was processing. And the processing of this particular error at an international border had a script, and it was a nightmare script. I saw it all unfold in a series of lightning-fast, horrifying tableaus. The car being directed to a secondary inspection area, a bleak, fenced-off lot, being ordered out of the vehicle. Luna, waking up confused and scared in a strange, official place. Men and women in uniforms separating us, asking questions. Asterisk, is this your child? Asterisk, asterisk. Where is her documentation? Asterisk, asterisk. Do you have a birth certificate? A letter of consent. Asterisk. The questions were a formality. The answer was no. We had nothing but our word, and our word was now worthless currency. The ice in my veins spread to my limbs, leaving them heavy and useless. My hands lay limp in my lap. The performance was over. There was no acting normal after this. There was only the raw, naked truth of our staggering mistake. Carlos found his voice first. It was a broken, strained thing, barely recognizable. Officer, there must be a mistake. It has to be in there. It was a weak, pathetic denial, a last-ditch effort to push against the inevitable. The officer's eyes flicked to him, then back to me. He didn't bother to respond to the plea. He simply held the open passport holder a little higher, a silent, damning exhibit in the case against us. The cold wasn't just fear anymore. It was the chill of profound, life-altering consequences. It was the freezing realization that a single stupid oversight could unravel everything. Our journey, our family, our future. We were no longer on vacation. We were in a crisis of our own making, and the man at our window held all the power. The ice in our veins was the cold touch of that power, and it was absolute. Carlos's weak denial hung in the air, a thin, pathetic vapor that evaporated instantly under the officer's impassive gaze. The man didn't acknowledge it. He didn't need to. Our guilt was written in the stark terror on our faces, in the frozen silence that had replaced our easy answers. The officer's eyes remained fixed on me, the primary point of contact. The friendly pretense was a distant memory. His voice, when he spoke again, was low, measured, and carried the unmistakable weight of authority. It was no longer a request. Ma'am, I need you to think carefully. Where is your daughter's passport? The command to act normal was now a cruel joke. There was no normal left. There was only the precipice. But some deep, primal instinct for survival, sharper than fear, kicked in. It was the instinct of a mother cornered, the absolute necessity to protect her child at any cost, even if that cost was a performance of monumental lies. I took a breath that shuddered through my entire body. I forced my hands to unclench in my lap. I made myself meet his eyes, and I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I manufactured a look of confused, flustered embarrassment. "Oh my goodness," I said, my voice a forced, breathy flutter. I brought a hand to my forehead, a gesture of self-recrimination I hoped looked genuine. "Officer, I am so sorry. I can't believe this. We were in such a rush this morning packing up. It has to be in my bag. I must have taken it out to note something down and forgotten to put it back. I'm so sorry." The lies fell from my lips, smooth and practiced, as if a stranger were speaking through me. I infused them with a desperate, pleading warmth, trying to frame this not as a sinister omission, but as a classic, scatterbrained parental mistake. I was no longer a potential criminal. I was a flustered, apologetic mom. I could feel Carlos's rigid silence beside me. He was playing his part now too, the supportive, equally embarrassed husband. He gave a weary, frustrated sigh, shaking his head slightly. Dios mío *, Elena, he muttered, the curse sounding perfectly natural. A beautiful piece of improvisation. I told you to double-check. It was a masterstroke. A tiny shift of blame within the team, a display of marital irritation that made the whole performance feel more authentic. We weren't a united front hiding something. We were a normal, bickering couple who had messed up. The officer's expression did not change. He was a stone. But he didn't call for backup. He didn't order us out of the car. He was still watching, still assessing. "I need you to retrieve your bag, ma'am," he said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "And locate the document." The command was a lifeline and a death sentence. It gave us a chance to look like we were fixing the problem. But it also meant the performance had to continue, and it had to be flawless. One wrong move, one flicker of panic, and the entire carefully constructed facade would crumble. "Of course. Yes. Right away," I said, my voice dripping with cooperative, frantic energy. I turned in my seat, my movements deliberately hurried and clumsy. My heart was hammering so violently I was sure he could see it through my shirt. This was it. The next act. We had to search. We had to fumble. We had to make a show of trying to find a document we knew, with absolute soul-crushing certainty, was not there. The performance of a lifetime was entering its most critical stage, and the stakes were higher than any Oscar. The curtain was up, the audience of one was merciless, and a single misstep would mean losing everything. The officer took a single, deliberate step back from the window, granting me a sliver of space while maintaining his vigilant watch. It wasn't a gesture of trust. It was a tactical repositioning, giving him a better angle to observe every move I made. His presence was a physical pressure, a silent, judging audience of one. My hands, which had just moments ago been instruments of a calculated performance, were now betraying me again, trembling with a life of their own. I unclipped my seatbelt with a fumble, the click echoing like a gunshot in the tense silence. The act of turning around in my seat felt like moving through syrup, every motion magnified, every second stretching into an eternity under his unblinking gaze. Luna's backpack was on the floor behind my seat, a bright pink explosion of sequins and cartoon characters. It was a relic of our cheerful, innocent trip, now a prop in a nightmare. I hauled it onto my lap, the weight of it feeling insignificant compared to the metaphorical ton of bricks it represented. "It's got to be in here," I announced, my voice too loud, too bright, a desperate attempt to narrate normalcy for our audience. "I just know I put it in here after the hotel." I unzipped the main compartment. The smell of crayons, fruit snacks, and childhood wafted out. My heart clenched. This was her world, and I was about to violate its innocence in a frantic pantomime. I began to pull things out, my movements rushed and artfully clumsy. A half-eaten bag of goldfish crackers, a box of worn-down crayons, a crumpled drawing of a cactus with a smiling face. Each item was a tiny dagger of guilt. I was rummaging through my daughter's precious things, not to find a lost toy, but to sustain a lie that was becoming more fragile with every passing second. I held up each item just enough for the officer to see before setting it aside on the seat between Carlos and me, building a pathetic monument to our futile search. Carlos played his part, shifting uncomfortably, sighing in a perfect imitation of exasperated frustration. "Check the front pocket, honey," he said, his voice strained. I am, I replied, the words laced with a shrillness I couldn't suppress. I moved to the smaller front pocket. My fingers, numb with fear, fumbled with the zipper. Inside was a jumble of hair ties, a tiny bottle of sanitizer, and a folded, sticky napkin. I made a show of sifting through it, my breath catching in my throat. This was it, the end of the road. There were no more compartments to check. The performance was reaching its inevitable, disastrous conclusion. We had run out of script. I looked at Carlos, my eyes wide with a silent scream. What now? The flustered mom act could only last so long. The next step was his. The officer's patience was a thin wire, and I could feel it about to snap. The agonizing search was over. We had failed to produce the miracle. All that was left was the empty backpack, the pile of childish treasures on the seat, and the crushing, Inescapable truth. We were out of moves, out of lies, and out of time. The officer's shadow fell across me again as he leaned back toward the window, his expression hardening. The pantomime was over. The real consequences were about to begin. The officer's shadow loomed over me, his patience visibly evaporating. The friendly pretense was a distant memory, replaced by a cold, bureaucratic impatience. The pantomime was over. He had watched the futile search, and his conclusion was clear in the set of his jaw. "Ma'am," he began, his voice taking on the hard, formal tone of impending procedure. "I'm going to need you and your family to—" "Wait." The word cut through the air, sharp and sudden. Came from Carlos. His voice wasn't loud, but it was charged with a new, electric intensity. All the performed exasperation was gone. This was real. The officer paused. His instructions halted mid-sentence. His eyes narrowed, shifting from me to Carlos. I turned, my heart in my throat, to see my husband staring not at the officer, but at the small pile of Luna's belongings on the seat between us. His hand was frozen, hovering over the mess. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a dawning, incredulous disbelief. He was staring at the folded, sticky napkin I had just pulled from the front pocket of the backpack. It was a diner napkin with a cartoon Roadrunner on it, stained with what looked like ketchup. "Elena," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. He didn't take his eyes off the napkin. My mind, fogged with terror, couldn't process it. What was he doing? This wasn't part of the act. With a movement that was agonizingly slow, as if afraid he might break a spell, Carlos reached down and picked up the napkin. It was then I saw it. The way it folded. It wasn't the soft crumple of a used napkin. It had a defined, rectangular rigidity to it. His fingers, trembling now for a different reason, carefully peeled apart the greasy, stained layers of paper. The officer, intrigued and suspicious, watched in silence. Time seemed to stop. The only sound was the rustle of the cheap paper. Carlos unfolded it once, then again. And there it was, nestled in the center of the ketchup-stained Roadrunner, protected by the layers of napkin, was a dark blue, gold-embossed booklet. Luna's passport. A sound escaped my lips. A half-gasp, half-sob. Couldn't believe it. It was impossible. A miracle. A stupid, messy, ketchup-stained miracle. Carlos held it up, a look of pure, unvarnished shock on his face. It must have gotten wrapped up in this at breakfast," he stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush of genuine, unscripted amazement. "When she wiped her hands, I must have just scooped it all up and put it in her bag without looking." The story was perfect. It was messy, illogical, and utterly, believably human. It was the kind of ridiculous mistake a rushed parent would make. He handed the passport, still nestled in its greasy shroud, to the officer. The officer looked from the passport to Carlos's stunned face, to my tear-filled eyes of disbelief. He took it, his expression unreadable. He carefully extracted the booklet from the napkin, wiping a smear of ketchup from its cover with a look of mild distaste. He opened it, glanced at Luna's photo, then at her sleeping form in the back seat. He compared the dates. The tension in the air was so thick it was suffocating. The miracle was in his hands. He could still choose to see it as a contrivance, a last-ditch trick. He closed the passport with a soft snap. He looked at us for a long, silent moment, his gaze weighing the sheer absurdity of the situation against the palpable, genuine shock on our faces. Finally, a hint of something, amusement, exasperation, flickered in his eyes. He let out a short, quiet breath that was almost a laugh. "You folks need to be more careful," he said, his voice dry, but the hard edge was gone. He handed the passport back to Carlos, along with the rest of our documents. "Have a safe trip home." He took a step back from the car and waved us through. The world, which had stopped, lurched back into motion. Carlos didn't need to be told twice. He put the car into drive, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the wheel. We pulled forward, away from the booth, away from the officer, away from the precipice. We didn't speak. We didn't look at each other. We just drove. The only sound the frantic pounding of our own hearts and the soft, steady breathing of our sleeping daughter, utterly unaware of the miracle that had just kept her world intact. The first mile past the checkpoint was driven in a silence so complete it was deafening. The only sound was the hum of the tires on asphalt and the ragged, uneven rhythm of our own breathing. We didn't look at each other. We didn't speak. We just stared straight ahead, two survivors in a state of profound shock, navigating on pure autopilot. Then, a tremor started in my hands, a fine, uncontrollable vibration that spread up my arms and through my entire body. A choked sob escaped me, followed by another, and then I was crying in earnest, great, heaving gasps that racked my frame. It was the release of a terror so absolute it had frozen me solid, now thawing into a storm of delayed reaction. Carlos reached over, his own hand trembling, and gripped my knee. His touch wasn't steadying. It was sharing the quake. He pulled the car over onto the dusty shoulder, threw it into park, and dropped his forehead onto the steering wheel. His shoulders shook with silent, relief-soaked tears. We sat there for a long time, two broken figures on the side of a vast, empty road, the immensity of what had almost happened crashing down on us. The ketchup-stained passport lay on the console between us, no longer a symbol of a miracle, but a relic from a nightmare. It was proof of how close we had come, how a silly napkin, a moment of parental haste, had been the only thread preventing our entire lives from unraveling. We eventually drove home. The vacation was over. The souvenirs were unpacked. The photos were uploaded. But we were not the same people who had left. The memory of that checkpoint didn't fade. It embedded itself. It became a permanent filter through which we viewed the world. I developed a low-grade, constant anxiety that hummed in the background of my life. I checked and rechecked documents before any trip, obsessively, compulsively. The sight of a uniformed officer could send a jolt of irrational fear through me. I'd have nightmares about zippers that wouldn't open, of searching through endless bags for something I could never find, while a faceless official watched, unmoved. Carlos, the planner, became more than meticulous. He became haunted. His systems became rituals, performed with a nervous intensity. He'd triple-check luggage, his face grim, the ghost of that oversight forever shadowing him. The confidence he'd always carried was scarred, replaced by a vigilance that was born of trauma. We never spoke about it in detail to anyone. How could we? The story was too absurd, the terror too personal. To others, it was a funny anecdote. You won't believe the stupid thing we did. But for us, there was no humor in it. There was only the cold sweat, the phantom feeling of that icy dread, the echo of the officer's neutral voice asking that simple, devastating question. The experience forged a new bond between us, but it was a bond tempered in fear. We'd catch each other's eye during a security check at an airport, a silent communication passing between us that said, "Asterisk, I remember. I'm checking too." Asterisk, the trust we had in the world, in the simple safety of a routine journey, had been shattered. We were forever changed, not because of the miracle, but because of the catastrophe that had preceded it. We had stared into an abyss of our own making, and we had learned, in the most visceral way possible, how fragile the structures of our lives truly are. The lingering trauma wasn't about the passport. It was about the breathtakingly thin margin between the life we lived and the life we had almost lost. We had been granted a second chance, but the price of that chance was the indelible memory of how easily it could all have been taken away. The world was no longer a safe place. It was a place where a single small mistake could cost you everything, and that knowledge was a weight we would carry forever.